Hey everyone! So I know I met some of you last week during your live streams, but in case you didn't get a chance to watch that, my name is Miss Reyes, and I'm going to be covering for Mr. Wang for the next few weeks or so. So yeah, I don't know, you can call me Miss Reyes or Miss Kiana or something. I don't know, anything that's just not disrespectful. So, I know I won't really be able to meet you in person, but I'm excited to try to get to know you in the best capacity that I can. Feel free to ask me, questions during our live streams to try to get to know me better. And yeah, so we're going to be starting off our human impact unit, and that's the last unit of the year, last 6 weeks. And so the way the unit is going to work, you've just finished studying ecology for the last like 2-ish, 3-ish weeks or so before spring break. And so human impact is kind of taking what you understand about ecology and then understanding, or I guess like kind of investigating how do we as humans, how do we interact with the environment and how do we impact it. So we're going to be starting, particularly this week, we're going to be focusing on understanding how the Earth originally was, and like how the Earth would naturally, take care of itself and sustain itself. How do we as humans kind of factor into this story? How are we engaging with the environment, and how are we affecting it? And then that basically sets us up to really understand how do we go about making changes to continue to support the environment and take care of it. So this week is mainly just about understanding how the Earth used to be, and then some of the causes, or like the root causes of the environmental problems we have. And then in the following weeks, we're going to be taking like a closer look at the ways that we might be living unsustainably, and the ways that we might be negatively impacting the environment. And then the unit will end with, after we understand all the ways that we are affecting the environment positively or negatively, then we can really think about what changes should we make to better impact the environment. Okay, so with that, okay, so we're going to start here. Okay, so the Earth is a system. That just means that, there are things that come into the system, things that go out of the system. There's your inputs and outputs. And the Earth has certain processes that are built in to help maintain a steady state, which means that the Earth remains stable. And there's 3 main processes that we're going to talk about. You can think of these as like the pillars of Earth's sustainability. The first one is energy. So I know you've talked about energy and matter and how they flow through ecosystems. You talked about that in your ecology unit with Mr. Wang. So we're just going to briefly recap that. So the first pillar of sustainability is that energy in equals energy out. This basically means that energy is balanced in the Earth. So if you look at the blue box that's just to the right of the text, you have energy coming in as sunlight, solar radiation. So pretty much all your energy coming in is from the sun. And then you see that it kind of goes around in a circle, the white arrows going around the Earth in a bit of a circle. That represents things like, the energy is absorbed maybe by the Earth, or some of it is absorbed by plants, and then the plants use the sunlight during photosynthesis, and then animals are going to eat the plants. So the energy does get moved around a little bit, and that's why you have the arrows going in a little bit of a cycle. But then if you keep looking to the very right of the blue box, you have another arrow that's leaving the Earth. And what that basically is representing is that energy pretty much moves in a straight line, well, with a little bit of a circle in the middle, but the idea here is that the energy coming in from the sun is relatively equal to the energy that's going to eventually leave the Earth in the form of heat. And it's important that the energy in is roughly equal to the energy out, because that maintains a stable temperature and a stable climate for the Earth. Because if more energy is leaving than energy coming in, then the Earth starts going into like an energy depletion, and then it gets colder. Or if energy is coming in from the sun, but not all of it is leaving the Earth, and some of it's getting trapped and starting to accumulate on the Earth, then you have then temperature starts to increase and the climate starts to increase. And we will get into that next week about how that process is happening. So the next process is that matter cycles, and you learned a lot about this during your biogeochemical cycles, right? Your water cycle, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So there's two key points here about the fact that matter goes in a cycle. The first is that there are no real inputs of matter into the Earth. I mean, you have your occasional like space rock that crashes onto the Earth, but that doesn't happen all the time, so we don't really count that. So if there are no real major inputs of matter, that means that you have to be careful about how quickly you use resources, because if you deplete a resource and it hasn't replenished yet, then you just don't have this resource anymore, and you have to wait for it to replenish. And that could be a really big deal if it's a very important resource that you need to live, like water. We'll stay on the water example. In your water cycle, right, you have water in the ocean, and then it evaporates into the air, it forms a cloud, and then it condenses, and then it eventually precipitates, and then water goes back into the land and waters the plants and everything. And then the water and the land is going to either flow across the land or under the ground and make its way back to the ocean, and that completes the cycle. Well, we all know that we need water to live, but the water in the water cycle, or at the various points of the water cycle, it's not always in a form that is A, accessible to us, or B, usable by us. Right? When the water is up in the sky in a cloud, we can't really access that, and we can't really use the water when it's up there. We have to wait for precipitation to happen so that the water comes back down to the land, and then you can, collect the water, filter it, and then drink it. I actually tried collecting rainwater, I think last weekend when it was raining, so I could water my plants. It didn't work very well. Somehow dirt got mixed in with the rainwater. I don't know. It didn't work very well. Anyway, so that's thing one and thing two, our energy balance, and then matter is cycling. Oh, wait, sorry. And the other thing about matter cycling is that if there's no major input, there's also no major output. And what that really means for us is that what we do with the matter on Earth, it stays here. So if we create something that doesn't really break down, and it's just kind of like trash, and it goes into the landfill or whatever, it doesn't just like leave the Earth and disappear. It stays with us, and then we have to figure out how we're supposed to manage it, or like, break it down so that we don't have this accumulation of trash everywhere on the planet. We'll get into that, like, I think in a couple weeks or something, when we talk about pollution and waste. Okay, third thing, sustainability thing about the Earth is biodiversity. Biodiversity is really important, and the Earth is a really diverse place. You've got different climates all around the planet. You got different ecosystems, different biomes. You got deserts and rainforests and wetlands, and inside those specific biomes, you have different species. You have species that are acclimated to dry weather, or acclimated to wet weather, and stuff like that. And this is really important because in the same way that you and I are different, and like I have certain unique characteristics or talents that allow me to be better fit for a certain task, you have certain talents and abilities that I don't have that make you better fit for a certain task that I wouldn't be very good at. And because of all the differences between us as humans, that allows us to be a robust and functioning society, because you have a lot of different people that are fit for different roles and they carry out different tasks. And it works the same way in the earth in general. You have different species that they're unique and they have different characteristics, and that allows them to fulfill different roles and do different tasks. And this helps the earth be really resilient, which means that the earth doesn't get disturbed very easily. And with these 3 pillars of sustainability, the earth can pretty much be sustained indefinitely, but we have to be acting responsibly and using our resources responsibly. So the problem is that humans are doing some things that are kind of disrupting the steady state, disrupting those 3 pillars of sustainability that we just talked about. So for one, we're kind of changing the inputs and outputs of both the energy, in terms of energy and matter. So as an example, deforestation, which is cutting down trees, and combustion, which is burning fuel, those actions, they will affect the amount of carbon dioxide that is in our atmosphere, and it kind of increases the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that is going to affect that energy balance that we talked about, because some of the energy coming in from the sun is now going to get trapped on the earth, and so then you don't have as much energy leaving the earth, and then you get an energy accumulation. And then with regards to matter, like I kind of hinted to in the last slide, if we are using up resources faster than they can replenish, then that's a problem, because you don't have any new input of matter, and so the matter is just traveling in this cycle, and if you have to wait for it to replenish. So as an example, aquifers are they're kind of like a reservoir of groundwater beneath the ground, and it is a source of drinkable water for us. But if you pump out the water faster than the aquifer replenishes, then eventually you run out of water in that aquifer. And so that's an example of how there has to be a balance of kind of respecting that things don't just replenish immediately. And it takes time for things to naturally replenish, and we can't just consume too quickly. We're also reducing biodiversity in 2 ways. So for one, we're clearing land just for various uses like agriculture, mining, urbanization. Urbanization is basically, like if you look outside, like I'll look outside right now because I'm next to a window, and I see street and buildings and concrete, but it didn't look like this originally. Like the earth did not naturally look like street and concrete, right? It originally was soil and dirt and natural trees and animals and whatnot. So for us to live in the way our urban society, we had to clear land so that we could lay down street and build buildings and whatnot, and so whatever ecosystem was here originally here underneath my apartment is now not there anymore, and so whatever plants and animals used to live right where my apartment is, they either died or they had to go migrate or something, and so by destroying the habitats that for plants and animals, then not only are we decreasing ecosystem biodiversity, but we're also decreasing species diversity, because some species might not be able to adapt to having to move to a new location, and they might just start dying. The third big thing that we're doing is we're relying on non-renewable energy sources in the form of fossil fuels. And we'll talk more about non-renewable energy, but basically, using non-renewable energy, it ends up destroying habitats because fossil fuels, they're like buried underground, and the way to extract them is you have to kind of like dig it out of the ground, and the processes of getting those fossil fuels requires you have to clear land, you end up destroying some of the habitat, and then it causes pollution, and it contributes to climate change by increasing the amount of greenhouse gases in the air. So, okay, so these are some of the big ways that we are disrupting the Earth's stability. And because we are disrupting this, the Earth's steady state, the Earth is moving into a disturbed state. So here's an example of a positive feedback loop. And we'll start at the very top, 12 o'clock, if you imagine this circle as a clock. Higher levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere are going to cause higher temperatures because, I mean, we'll get into that like real more in depth next week. But anyway, higher CO2 in the atmosphere, it results in higher temperature because energy gets trapped. And the higher temperature is going to lead to faster decomposition. If you recall, decomposition just is the breaking down of what was once something alive in like a dead plant or a dead animal, and it gets broken down so that the atoms and nutrients can get recycled. And then faster decomposition is going to result in more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. More carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, then you go back to the top of the circle and you get higher temperatures. And this kind of just goes in a cycle faster and faster and faster because each step of the circle is kind of feeding into the next step, and that's why it's a positive feedback loop. And we are contributing to this positive feedback loop kind of in two major points of the circle, the top and bottom of the circle. We are adding carbon dioxide into the atmosphere through our actions such as deforestation and combustion. We're also decreasing biodiversity through our actions of clearing land and destroying habitats, and that is accelerating extinction. So when you have more animals going extinct, not to be overly morbid, but that means animals or plants and animals, there's more dead plants and animals. And so then you have more decomposition. And so then you're feeding into the bottom of the circle, and then you have more decomposition to add more carbon dioxide to the circle. So it just continues going in a circle faster and faster and spinning out of control. So that sounds really morbid and depressing. But it's really important to continue to have hope and believe that just because the Earth is, being disturbed and moving towards a disturbed state and moving away from stability, it's not like all hope is lost, and we still have time and we have the ability to make changes to reverse some of the damage that's already been done. But before we can think about making changes to reverse some of the damage, we have to have an understanding of where the actual problem is, right? Because we want to make a change that is actually going to get to the heart of the issue. So we want to think about what is the root cause of all these environmental problems. And the Story of Stuff is a video that you're going to be watching later on in the week that is going to be talking about our consumption habits and the ways that we may not be aware that consumption is affecting parts of the world. So consumption is really the main driver of environmental issues if we don't have healthy or responsible consumption habits. Consumption can lead to all these things: over-extraction, pollution, habitat destruction. You think about if you have a greater demand for things, then you have to extract more resources in order to meet those demands. And when you're extracting resources, that results in a lot of habitat destruction, habitat loss, and that results in biodiversity loss. And then lastly, the last bullet point at the bottom of this, our use of fossil fuels is also, our consumption of fossil fuels is also contributing to pollution and habitat destruction, biodiversity loss, and climate change. And all these problems, they really get magnified by overpopulation. And I really want you to focus on the word magnified. The idea is that if you have, if you have unhealthy consumption habits, or you're consuming excessively, if you have more people that are also consuming excessively, then it just sort of makes the problem increase in scale. So the thing about populations is that, you know, all species are going to consume resources, but you can't have an infinite population with a finite amount of resources. And so at some point, you reach a point where there aren't enough resources to continue supporting the population, and that limit is called a carrying capacity. And you know, population scientists they've discussed and debated, like, oh, what's the carrying capacity for a human population, or are we there already, or you know, what does that mean for us? And you know, while it's true that the human population can't grow forever, you know, at some point it does have to stop, because at some point you hit the limit of there aren't enough resources. But I saw this YouTube video once that talked about, you know, human population growth and carrying capacity. And the one thing I really liked about that video is that it talked about how our lifestyle habits, our consumption habits, they really have a big effect on what the carrying capacity is. The carrying capacity, it depends on how we consume as a population. And that's why I really want to point us back to consumption as the main, the root cause of our environmental issues. Making changes in consumption habits is really going to have the greatest impact in making changes, positive changes on the environment. So for the rest of this unit, we'll be kind of, what I'm hoping is that we will gain a greater awareness of our consumption habits that we either are aware of or not, or aren't aware of, and then just have a greater understanding of how our actions, the way we consume, how that affects our immediate environment, but also environments elsewhere in the world that we may not really be aware of. Okay, all right. So that was it for that lecture today. Tomorrow, I have a population worksheet for you to work through. You'll be graphing the Earth's population, and then answering some questions. I know in advance that, you know, I didn't really talk a lot about population dynamics and stuff like that, and so you might feel a little bit like, oh, I don't really know the answer to this because we didn't really talk about it. That's okay. That's why I placed that worksheet tomorrow, so that you'll hopefully get to look at it before Thursday when we talk on live stream. So just do your best to answer it as best as you can, or maybe even like just maybe think about it and just kind of ponder it in your mind, and then we'll discuss it on Thursday. And then Friday you'll be looking at that story of stuff video. Okay. All right. So that was it for today. I will see you Thursday.